trying to make the other side. Ever seen a young girl growing old, trying to make herself a bride? So what becomes of you, my love?
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Pray that he's still out there, somewhere.
Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us on Eating While Honey and Locusts. I'm glad to be with you today. Dr. Pidgeon is in the studio and my name is Jessica Knock, your host. And it's just great, as always, to be with you. These Tuesdays come rolling by and sometimes you feel a really heavy sense, a light sense. You feel a leading of the Ruach. Today, just before the program began, we began speaking and I realized, okay, this is one of those programs where it's going to be Ruach, we invite you, come what may, you lead and you take over. And that's exactly what this is about here. You know, I was just saying to Dr. Pidgeon that this week has been hard. He was explaining to me that within his own fellowship, there's been a severe accident that resulted in a fatality for his fellowship, just personally how he is affected in certain ways. And then just us as a community with Eating While Honey and wider, the last two sets of Tuesday programs have been actually quite outstanding in their responses. And what that shows me is more attacks come because you're exposing, you're opening up. You see, last week we were just looking, it might have looked like we were looking at a topic, looking at Gilgamesh, looking at the Nephilim. Why did the military get involved? What that showed you was that there was a reason for the invasion in Iraq, and it wasn't just a war, it was hidden. And that made you begin to think, and goodness, the amount of response that I've had to that in comments alone, it's over 2,500. A couple of different people working on intelligence, seeing this video that we put together, saying, well, they were involved in that and they saw firsthand the evidence. They saw firsthand what was taken away. And only last year was those artifacts returned to Iraq. So I was really surprised by the response. I'm not speaking about the response to you. What I want to highlight to you is the fact that people started to engage, become the historian, become the Berean Jew, and see more. The week before that, we talked on the seed war, the same thing, looking from the days of Noah, and we're living as in the days of Noah now. And it instigated thought, it provoked you to look at the word, to challenge where we are now. And, you know, when that happens as a community, then different attacks come. Since then, it's, if you're in the Torah, you're under the law, that's wrong. If you're not under the law, then that's another reason. You're too far to the left, you're too far to the right. You know, it's called set apart, even that is wrong. And what that shows me, rather than listen to anybody tell you, defeat you and bring you down, you have to stand strong, because this is a lonely journey and you stand alone. If you have a spouse to stand with you, that's great, or someone within your household or in your surrounding, that's wonderful. But I have seen it like never before. I'm just speaking with Dr. Pidgeon at the beginning. I realized this, and today, that this is a journey that you have to stand strong, stand alone in your field, even if you're defending that field on your own, despite the accusation. Don't let anyone bite you down, grind you down, accuse you of being wrong. Why? Because you know your Elohim. You know what he has said to you. You know how he has called you. You know what he has inscribed within you and the word within you. And don't let anyone take away from that in this time. That's what I want to say to you. Going back to the way that these programs are here, you know that the blueprint of these programs is to help you navigate these prophetic times that we are living in now. That is not easy. It is so hard. Stephen said maybe last week or the week before, the emphasis of our programs is always looking at what the world is in now, the state physically and biblically. And that is a difficult thing to grasp. So where do you get your peace? Where does your shalom come from? How do you worship in light of all this? It's all down to you, your habitation of the word, your habitation of the presence, the Ruach HaKodesh in your lives, your relationship from that private closet, that prayer place. That's where it happens. Then you can look at something like Hebrews, for the word of Elohim is quick, is powerful, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing, even dividing asunder of the soul and the ruach, the joints and the marrows, because it's a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. Then you get power in your prayer life. You get power in your spirit. You get power in yourself, understanding it's not of your flesh, it's not your empowerment, but he who goes before you. And it makes going through tough waters then parting, even in the highs and the lows, in the peaks and the valleys. You can survive. You can fortify this. You can go through this. You know, so no matter how tough it is, how hard it is, what we are hearing, a revelation came to me, and it came slightly because of reading the Torah portion. And a friend Kimberly sharing how she just was in tears when she read that about Mary just pouring this bottle of alabaster, the perfume inside it, over Messiah Hamashiach's feet. And when you think of that, and you think that you have the opportunity to do that in your worship, in your prayer life, it is actually quite humbling, and it is actually quite beautiful that it brings you to that same revelation that all you can do is have no words, be in awe, to the point that it brings you in tears. You know, we shared this on our Saturday fellowship, and it was the males that responded more than the females. Maybe the females grasped this already, but for the males to see how they responded was quite a beautiful moment, to see how it affected their spirituality, how they just wanted to get in, dig in, and worship. It reminds me of the warrior bride. She's in her dress, but she has her war shoes on and she's ready. And that's how we need to be when it comes to our place of worship. I want to read to you Matthew 26, verses 7 to 13, because this is my focus. It's bringing out the alabaster jar is mentioned only 3 times in the word, and this is one of them. So it's Matthew 26, 7 to 13. There came unto him a woman having an alabaster box of very precious ointment, and poured it on his head as he sat to eat. This is Yahusha, I missed verse 1. But when the Talmudim, that's the disciples, saw it, they had indignation, saying, to what purpose is this waste? For this ointment might have been sold for much and given to the poor. When Yahusha understood it, he said unto them, why trouble this woman? For she wrought a good thing unto me. For ye have the poor always, but you will not have me always. That's really powerful when you understand. You will not have me always. For in that she has poured the ointment on my body. She did it for my burial. They didn't even grasp that revelation. And I say to you, whoever this spiritual shall be preached into the whole world, there also shall this woman be done, has done, and a memorial made for her. So I'm reading that memorial that is made for her now. But the disciples missed it. They missed the mark. They didn't see that it was for his burial. She's also known as Mary of Bethany. You know, the important thing I want you to understand here is she didn't do something randomly. It was intentional. She wanted to anoint him, to anoint Messiah. She gave her everything, literally her everything in doing so, because that was her inheritance. So she knew that was it. She will pour it. And what will she have after that? But she saw it as an act of worship. She saw it as an act of sovereignty, saying, I surrender. I give you my all. I align my life to you. I worship you. And despite the tribulation that we go through and what is happening corporately around us, that has to be our stand, because that is the only way that we can live and survive through this. In that way, it is the spiritual mentality that we have to take on. It's like Job, though you may slay me, though he slays me, yet will I praise him, yet will I put my trust in you. And that's exactly our stand. That is exactly the posture that I want to encourage you into. She is an example for you and I, both male and female. She sat, and I know you know this, more than once on many occasions at Messiah's feet, listening and learning from him. He became her mentor, her teacher, and her friend. This is our weaponry. This is what brings us into the Ruach, into the Spirit, that it becomes part of our vibrancy, that it sets us apart, that we can survive, that we can speak into situations. And it's that important, but it also gives us a revelation of the Father, and it gives us a revelation to be in real relationship with Yahusha. And that is what is important. And that's how we can know weapon. I can see it with my eyes, but it shall not come near you. It shall not touch you, because you're fortified in a strength. You know, the Yahusha, he was being hosted by Mary and Martha. Martha is the sister to Mary. She was so concerned to the point that she was distracted about being a good host. I can understand that. So can you. And Yahusha turned around to her and said, Martha, why are you troubled about all these things? What is causing you to be so full of worry and weary? You know what she done? She was like the disciples. She underestimated, she underemphasized the one thing that was needed: to hear the word of Yahusha, to grasp the revelation of Yahusha like her sister did. She did this on more than one occasion. And that shows us that we must always be in awe. We must always be in reverence of who we worship, how the word becomes alive and active and living in our life. Mary, Martha, they experienced a great loss. You know the story of their brother Lazarus. One thing, Yahusha turned up 3 days late. Why did he turn up 3 days late? So when he rose her brother from the dead, they would know that it was him, Yahusha, and the will of the Father doing this miracle. Why? Because there is a Jewish thought that after 3 days, the soul leaves the body. So even when you see it from that point of view, there's something that is just magnificent to grasp, you know, and to take hold of. Mary, through all these experiences with her brother, sitting at Yahusha's feet so many times, she learned to savor, to revere the moment. She wasn't walking in the flesh. She learned to walk in the Ruach. She learned not to be impulsive. She became rooted in the word, rooted in her trust and her faith, and in full surrender to her Savior. And that is what you and I have the responsibility daily to do ourselves. It's as simple as that. Sometimes it's going back to the basics, but it's when you go back to those basics that you can survive, that you can live, that you can worship, that the day becomes easier, no matter how hard these things are, because they are hard. The next time that the alabaster box is mentioned in Luke, and this is Luke 7:37 to 50. So let me read here. And behold, a woman in the city which was a sinner, when she saw that Yahusha sat and ate at the table of the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of anointment, and she stood at his feet behind him, weeping. She recognized her sin, and she recognized who she was standing in front of, and began to wash his feet with her tears. That's just beautiful. That's how our prayer should be. That's how our worship should be. That's how our posture should be, our desire, our want. And did wipe them with her hair. For any woman, you know that when your hair gets wet and you've just styled it, then it goes frizzy. So even from that point of view, I can understand it. But this was an act of worship, not of vanity. It showed her shame, who she was in her sin. This is just such purity here. With the hair of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with ointment. Then when the Pharisee, which had hidden him, saw it, he spoke within himself, saying, this man, if he truly were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman this is that he touches, for she is a sinner. Then Yahusha answering said unto him, Simeon, I have somewhat to say unto you. And he said, yes, Rabbi, speak. Say on. There was a certain creditor which had 2 debtors. The one owed 500 pence and the other 50. And when They had nothing to pay. He frankly forgave them both. Tell me, therefore, which one of them will love him most? Shimon answered and said, I suppose that he to whom he forgave most. And he said unto him, You rightly have judged. And he turned to the woman and said unto Shimon, See this woman? I entered into your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she washed my feet with tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. You gave me no kiss, but the woman, since this time I have come in, has not stopped kissing my feet. My head with oil you did not anoint, but this woman has anointed my feet an ointment. Wherever I say unto you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much, but to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little. And he said unto her, Your sins are forgiven. That is a beautiful, so many different things are represented there, from forgiveness, from retribution, from acknowledgement, from worship, from prayer. That is what I want to emphasize to you. What I want to bring out of that is, what is this meaning of the alabaster box? What is its significance? Because there is a significance. It represents something great in our lives, and it's very personal. It comes from that prayer closet. It comes from who you are and how you fortify yourself in your place of worship as a worshiper to a living and sovereign Elohim. You know, we ourselves can become broken just like the box. And we have to allow ourselves to become like that before a holy Elohim and surrender to him. Give him, because he sacrificed once and for all for our sins. And we need to come into that full acknowledgement and complete surrender of that. That's where you experience true release. And for some of you, that is a real pinnacle point for you to understand that, to move in that freedom, that unhindered release. Because as you break through, you're breaking that neck of the jar, and it just takes you into a new level of anointing. That box symbolizes you giving your best, like she gave her all. That was her first fruits. We must give our first fruits. She didn't bring the last of the least that she had. She brought her absolute best, the most expensive item in her house. Why? Because Yahusha was worthy, is worthy, and we have to show him that worthiness through our lives. What I love, and this is what also brings me to tears when I think about the act of what she done, both women, what they done actually. She anointed him before his death and burial. Okay, that's not just history. That's not just something for now. How is that relevant to us? Because today, as the believer, we serve as an ambassador, and we anoint and we speak in the now before his return. Then it was before his death and burial. Now for us, we are charged with before his return. And I take that really seriously. I want to impress that same thing to you. That is the distinction of you being called out and being set apart. And you must live to that. Let no one deceive you, and let no one come against you, break you down and say otherwise. Why? Because you are called and you are defined by one only, not by man. So stand strong. That is your distinguishing factor. And that is what distinguishes us as worshippers. We must not be coerced. We have seen 3 years of being coerced, 6 this apart, 6 that apart, wear this. You can't go and do that. If you want to travel, you have to take something. Do you understand how important it is? Because that is worship. Oh, the Antichrist isn't here, or this isn't the mark. Why? Because it's not a thing of worship. Well, yes, it is a thing of worship. Because if you want your old life back, then you have to worship this system, and you have to do these things so that you can have access to that. Otherwise, you are ostracized. So I see it completely differently. And this has always been especially escalated for the last 3 years, one where you are showing who you worship. Make no mistake about that at all. Let me take you to Matthew. Okay, Matthew 16. I'm reading verses 25 to 26. Very short here. For whoever will save his life shall lose it, and whoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? That's exactly what I was talking about with the coercion. What will you gain? What are you prepared to let go of? You see, Mary denied herself the most valuable possession she had, giving Yahusha everything. I know I've said that several times, but I need to hone that home to you. She didn't pour a little bit of the perfume to anoint him. She gave it all. That was her inheritance. I've said that. It was as much of a price that she could pay, her first fruits. Incidentally, you know that alabaster box? It was made of stone. When she broke that vessel, she broke the long neck to reach the contents. Not only was it costly to her, I see the connection of that tomb, that stone tomb of Yahusha's death, which was on the horizon. To be on the horizon for him was the resurrection, is also leading to the resurrection. I hope I've explained that well. So there was a connection. That stone that she had, it was connecting. He was anointed for this purpose of death and resurrection. It was a cost to her, and she saw what that meant. You know, this is a perfume bottle. This is my daughter's one. You have to be really careful, because if you're not delicate, you'll lose the whole contents. She didn't care. She forcefully broke that bottle, took it and anointed him. What you're doing is a forceful act of worship. What you're doing is an intentional act of worship. She carried in her own hand her own stone, which reminds me and reminds you to keep hope, to keep strong and to fight. Because when that stone was rolled away, it shows the path to eternal life. And what we are fighting for now, yes, we look to eternal life and we look to the millennium kingdom, but we see where we are in these times. But this gives us strength and this gives us peace when you see how to worship at a time like this and to make him so real in your life. So what I want to say to you is open the alabaster box in every situation that you have, break through and make this your first fruit and say, I will not leave you until you bless me, like so many people in the word had said, until they got that blessing, until they got that revelation. Cultivate a heart of worship. I want to encourage you with like that. Like nothing else, no matter how hard your times are. I know that I'm speaking to people that are grieving. Grief doesn't have to be just in death. Grief can be through the loss of situations, unfulfilled destiny, health, stage 3, stage 4, stage 5, prognoses. There's so many different things, unyoked marriages, accusations against your faith, your own family not understanding. Cultivate your place of worship and you will be able to stand even stronger. Yea, though he slay me, I will put my trust in you. Then that becomes so real. Make this your offering. Forget about man. Go into a new realm of worship. Because then Yahusha will recognize you. You're not serving man, you are serving him. You are counting that cost. Take up your cross. That's where that is important to value, but it goes further than just taking up your cross. That's where Christendom would leave it. But you can't just take up your cross and leave it there now. There has to be more. When you look at Ezekiel 9, let me go there, right? Everything I was saying about coercion, etc. When you look at Ezekiel 9, verse 4 to 6, it's all about this, keeping that mark, keeping that tab, being that distinguished, that set apart. It's not, as I always say, once saved, always saved. And I'll end with this. And Yahusha said unto him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, set a tab upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and cry for the abominations that be done in the midst thereof. So not only am I talking about you coming to a place of cultivation and worship when you, in this area, when you approach your prayer life in Yahusha, the Father, this way, but also you have to preserve that seal, that mark as part of his disciples, as part of, I'm not going to be coerced by the narrative of this world. I'm not going to be told how to survive for my old life coming out of Babylon. That's what it is about. That's what I want to impress. And I know this week this has been very real to so many of you here. And so we want to encourage you. We want to speak into your life and say, no, this is a hard journey and you are on your own. But you, the right prospects, the right way in the word, you can survive this and you can get through this. So I want to bless you. I want to leave you with this and say, it is not easy, but he goes before you. And that is all that you need. Even when you cannot speak, the Ruach will go before you. That breath will go and intercede before you to Yahushua to the Father. And you will see breakthrough, and you will see kingdom dynamic come into your life. Never give up. Keep on keeping on. Okay. And with that, Dr. Pidgeon, lovely to have you here. You know, you really touched my heart, what you were saying at the beginning, and that sort of spurred a lot of the way that this went. You know, it is one of those programs where, okay, you take over and intervene and lead.
Yeah, amen. Amen. You know, one of the things that when we talk about being like Yahusha, we want to be like Yahusha.
Yeah.
You have to remember a couple of things that Yahusha said. Number one, I do nothing in my own name, but do as the Father has asked me.
Yes.
They're not my words, but the words of the Father through me. I do nothing except the Father instructs me and tells me what to do. These are very poignant words of Yahusha. He does nothing except what the Father has told him. And in Luke 4, we see that Yahusha went to the synagogue, opened the scroll to read, as was his custom. Now, these things are they're all very important aspects of who is Yahusha and who it is that we should follow and how to follow him.
Yeah.
Because that Yahusha would say, I do nothing except the Father instructs me, except what the Father has told me. These are not my words, but the words of the Father.
Absolutely.
It becomes an important instruction because what did the Father teach us? What has Yah shown us? He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does Yah require of thee? But to act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly.
Amen.
And so this is, these are all part of who we are and what we should be. And I think that when we talk about the woman with the alabaster jar, how much was forgiven her? Everything.
Everything. Yeah.
Everything. And, this is such an important aspect of it because she recognized that if not now, when?
Yeah.
What is this alabaster jar being kept with this spikenard? Why is it being kept? If not now, when?
Yeah.
And, and I think this is the question for all of us now in the world. If not now, when? Well, it's time for now. It's time for now. And of course, the believer's life, it's always time for now. In other words, when you get up in the morning, I can remember thinking, and I had many friends who dedicated their lives to their retirement. I have to save this for my retirement. I need to have all this put away in my retirement fund. I have to have a retirement fund going, and I need to have my retirement taken care of. And then when they get to their retirement, they're alive for a year and then they're dead. Because they did not live their life while they were alive.
Yeah.
And the thing is when you're talking about living your life when you're alive, this is the embrace of life itself. Embrace life and not death. Embrace the doctrine of life and not the doctrine of death. And many people, I think, kind of get lost in that. But when you talk about a doctrine that is associated with paganism, you talk about a doctrine that celebrates unbridled sin, that unleashes and gives license behavior that is not described in Scripture. But when you do that, you embrace a doctrine of death, right? Choose this day whom you will serve.
Yeah.
And if you walk away from the doctrine of life, and the doctrine of life is a doctrine, to be a disciple is to be disciplined. Yah chastens those that he loves.
Yeah.
The ones that are not chastened are subject to wrath. And so we see these things, and some of these things appear difficult, of course. And many people wanted to, the quest in humanity was to be free of the restrictions of the discipline of Scripture. But when you unbridle that discipline, for instance, let me give you an example. If you have a system that is functioning based upon your ability to transport food using wagon trains that are being pulled by 2 horses, when you unbridle those horses and say run free, they're running free and enjoying it, but you're not getting food to the market.
No.
Right. And it is the same thing with anything we do in life. If you have a child and you say, I don't want to expose you to the rigors of discipline. I want you just to run free and experience liberty. First of all, there's a very good chance the child will kill himself before he's 3 years old.
Yeah,
And,
like the story of the gorillas with the child that ran ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is, so when you're talking, any parent that loves his child disciplines his child in the difference between right and wrong. And oftentimes it's not a moral issue for purposes of imposing morality, but rather it's an issue of instructing the child in how to remain alive. Don't put your hand over the hot burner. Don't run out in the street without looking both ways. Don't chase your ball when it runs away from you. These are things that, don't take your hands off the handlebars when you're riding your bike, right? These are rules and protocols that you teach the child in order to preserve the child's life. And so many of those protocols start with don't, no, right? How many times you hear a young mother, no, don't do that, no, right?
Yeah.
It's no, and don't, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe the child feels like the child is not at liberty. And many adults felt they were not at liberty to explore whatever deviancy they wanted to explore. Well, this is not discrimination, nor is it enslavement. This is discipleship, and it's discipline, and it's the discipline that brings a society into growth and brings a society into life. And when you want to take away growth from a society and you want to remove the life, the vitality of the society, what you do is you open the door to licentiousness. And once you do, you can bring that society to inert nothingness and death, because that's where society goes.
Yeah. Wow. That's really good what you say. It actually leads where I want to go, because I won't spoil it anymore. I want to share the screen and just show this so people begin to understand where we're going with this. So I hope it will allow me to. Yeah. Okay. So this is Radio Free Alaska. It quite miraculously just turned up. It's something that happened after years for you, and I want you to explain that, of being obedient to the vision, but then all of a sudden the time was now, and it was a suddenly act. Monday we created the group. By Monday evening I'm ready to go on air, is what you said. But there's something quite beautiful about this. This is very vintage. This is very classical. It is not another program. It is not another project. All praise goes to Yahusha. All praise to the Father, because this is definitely his work at hand. That's something that I want to say to you here. But the way that you present this, it's like a podcast. So there's no one actually that you're seeing. You're just hearing you narrate, Stephen, and you do it in a really wonderful way that it's just that vintage tone, that classic tone. Shane and I, we had a channel that went out through all of Sky on the Rupert Murdoch different Sky platforms, and we had Dad's Army, Bilko, It's a Wonderful Life, those type of character programs and quality movies, so that the nostalgia, the old family values, what you're trying to say, how Alaska was, comes through, and that's what this reminds me of. But you are bringing it from a biblical point of view, wider than a Sefer lens. You're showing people how to survive, how to live, and you're bringing it from your own circumstances, your own life experiences, your own land that you live, a voice of freedom in an unfree world. You know, I've transcribed everything you said in that first program, so I want to go through those bits, but I don't want to say too much. You just take us into the next steps of this program, because what's happened is people are looking forward to have it at their 6 p.m., 11 a.m. each day and hear what you have to say. It's like this alabaster box revelation. It shows them, okay, this is how I survive. This is how I prepare. There is a code, and this code is how to survive. And this is how to worship as well, which is why I spoke the way I did at the beginning, because it complements where you were going with this vision. So, you know, just draw that out, Stephen. And it's something that is actually quite unique. And we're excited to see how it develops.
Well, I have to admit, I'm very excited with it. I mean, over the weekend, you know, having done the first week, I went to bed sleeping, and all I could think about was Radio Free Alaska. It was like, wow. You know, and it's not really, what can I tell you? You know that most of the things aren't planned, Jesse. You know, in my life, you know, we do like the dig is completely unrehearsed. We prepare research and PowerPoints for the dig. It's not
Yeah.
that we're just babbling, but the research is presented, but it's completely unrehearsed with the co-hosts. And so we just go, we do it. And Radio Free Alaska is a very similar thing. I'm letting the Ruach guide everything right now in terms of what is to be presented. And the beauty of it is we're able to talk about so many of the things that I have spent decades, working on it, and decades that Yah has been preparing me to discuss. And quite frankly, Jesse, I mean, I don't know how many years I have left. This fellow who died on the highway Saturday night, he was my age, right? We're both 68, and he made one wrong decision. He made the left turn too short.
Yeah.
Making the left. I mean, you know, if you think about this for just a minute, I'm sure this is kind of difficult, but I want to kind of share what happened. You had a 4-lane road, 2 lanes coming this way and 2 lanes going that way. And remember, in the States, we drive on the right-hand side of the road, not on the left-hand side. So in Alaska, there's very little light. And in particular, in the winter, it's a cloudy night. It's very, very dark. You can't see anything. Really, the only thing you can see is whatever your headlights illuminate. And the roads are covered with snow and ice. So as a consequence, it doesn't make any difference what paint you have on the road. You can't see any paint. You have essentially the tire tracks where other people have driven, and and that's just black as compared to the whiteness of the ice that's packed. So you have to drive on that blackness. Now, when they plow the roads and they create a berm at the edge of the road. And the berm becomes, when it melts, it gets hard and becomes like really very powerful ice. If you hit that ice with a tire, it'll be your car. It just stops you directly and your car will just go over. Wow. So you have to be very careful. There's no room for error anywhere you go.
Yeah.
So I think what happened to him is that he made the left-hand turn and he thought he had made it into the right-hand lane. I think he was thinking he was on a 2-lane road, frankly. He thought he had made it into his lane, but in fact he hadn't. He'd made a left into the fast lane of the 2 oncoming lanes. Right. Now, if you're in that situation, now put yourself in that situation, Jesse. So here you are. You've got 2 lanes here. You're in the fast lane of an oncoming traffic.
Wow.
Now, and you've got nowhere to go. You have a berm on this side that cannot be transgressed with a vehicle. You have a berm on this side that cannot be transgressed. So what can you do? You have to try to wait to turn around, wait for the cars to get past you to turn around, or maybe you just put it into reverse, put the pedal down. But the cars coming at you are doing 65 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know how long he had under these circumstances, but he made the left. And when he made the left, he realized I'm on the wrong side of the road. And by the time he recognized that, there was a car coming at him at 65 and it hit him head on.
Wow.
And it was suddenly over. One small decision, and it was suddenly over. Well, similarly, we have this in our life really at all mature times. One wrong decision can take us down a path that cannot be retrieved. One small act, one error in judgment can bring irreversible consequences. And these kinds of things are the kinds of things that we address on Radio Free Alaska. We address this idea of, I mean, I can give you an example, Jesse. I had been gone from Alaska for decades. And I flew into town and walked out at the airport. And I walked out to the, where you would get in your car in front of the airport. And I walked out and I looked at the mountains that are behind Anchorage there, this huge landscape. And the instant I stood there, it was only for maybe just a couple of minutes, the rules started flooding back in, right?
Yeah.
Started coming. The rules like you don't travel without your heavy winter boots, you don't travel without a coat, you don't travel without something like ears and gloves. You have to have these kinds of emergency supplies. You have to remember this about the ice and the snow. You have to know this about this particular quality. You have to know this about what's going to happen at sundown, how much visibility you will have. Just all these things would come in, that rules that are formidable. Now, you don't see these rules. The closer you get to the equator, the more relaxed you can be. Well, if I forget my coat, I can just sleep on the beach tonight, or I can sleep on a bench, or, it's not going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
In Alaska, that is a big deal. If you make the wrong decision, you could lose your ears, or you could lose your finger.
Yeah.
And so all of these things come down. And so when you think about these kind of critical code, this is the kind of thing that we discuss. And as we get farther into it, we're going to be discussing, I'm going to go back and I'm going to read some of the old Alaskan literature.
Yeah.
I'm going to be looking at some old Alaskan poetry, and we're going to be looking at some modern poetry too. And we're also going to be reviewing the book, this fiction book, historical fiction book that I've written called Tusk. Now on Fridays, I'm going to be reading from that book, Tusk. It's not yet published. So I'm just going to read the book and bear in mind that this is historical fiction. Okay?
Yeah.
Historical fiction. But it is based upon all of the stories. When I wrote the book, it's very funny because I had this plot in mind, and then I decided to write the book. And as I wrote the book, all of these things that had happened in my youth were coming back. They were coming back, and they were coming back, and they were coming back. And so I presented them in the context of these characters in the book. And I think hopefully people will find it interesting and will enjoy the book.
Yeah.
So we'll be talking about that. We're going to be talking about the tenets of freedom. We're going to be getting into here very quickly the 10 Commandments and the relationship of the 10 Commandments to how a person lives. We're going to be talking about sacred ground and making ground sacred. In the immortal words of Forrest Gump, sacred is as sacred does.
That's good. Yeah.
It is as sacred does. And so this is a big point in how we live and where we live. And, and I got to tell you too, Jesse, I mean, this is not, I'm not just hyping up Alaska because, I do believe that at one time, the United Kingdom was the wilderness. It was the wilderness. It was the wilderness into which the house of Yasharel fled. And it was provided by Yah as a wilderness. And in that provision comes this whole notion of we go to a wilderness to practice the Torah that we did not practice when we were in the land. This is out of Ezra 10. We go to the wilderness to practice the Torah that we did not practice when we were in the land. And it's a big call for the tribes to do this. And of course, no matter what happens, when we get away, the pagan side of things rises. Well, let's worship another God. It's okay to have diversity. Let's worship other ideas. Let's take a look at this or take a look at that. Well, those things can make a big difference. So,
yeah, Absolutely. The one thing from the whole tenet of what you've been sharing for the last few days is the code. You have to live by it. If you don't, then it will be to your detriment. You know, you've got the risk of the bear, the risk of the moose, the risk of the slippery roads, as you've just explained with a real life experience from your fellowship, avalanches, so many different risk factors. So you're in the wilderness where you're away from certain governmental dangers and dictation and so on. But then on the other hand, you've got this physical wilderness, and you've got to know how to walk with it to survive. I found that really interesting, because for all of us, if we're understanding where we are biblically in these times, then we're wondering, okay, well, what will that wilderness be like? This is the closest type of comparison that we can get. We know that those in the cities are going to be attacked, and so you have to move out. So you're going into more of a forested wilderness type of scenario that you're talking about. People are trying to get homes far away in the sticks for this very reason, so that they can contend and stay strong more. So when you personalize it to people's cultures and understandings, it becomes really, really real to them. And I think that's why people are enjoying this so much. One thing that became clear to me is that you were a veteran. You put so much into your country. I think you said 30 years as well, just into Alaska with your career, and you really sowed into the country. I was really, it being a free state, in that at the times when it was the earthquake and there was much devastation, then it came to a point where, okay, we just have to go by an agreement, and everyone, because you had no revenue left, you had no finances left, so you had to trust. Your doors were open, you could go in, you could help. It was just so different. You had to build from the bottom up. How do we in these times recreate something which will be a necessity and will be needed? So when you see this has happened, you've lived through some of this, you've seen the history of it, and how you share it to us, it makes it really real. And I think that's why it's comforting in the way that you present it, one, by your voice and tone, but two, by the truths that are hidden in there that you are sharing. It's quite phenomenal. And I think that's why those who have learned to check it out on Telegram are really being blessed, because it's infusing them with thought, things that they have to face, but done so gently.
Yeah, well, let me give you just an example, Jesse, about that thing you're talking about. So last summer, we were going dip netting out on the Susitna River. Now, the Susitna River is a huge river. At some places, it's a mile wide,
Yeah.
and it moves about 60,000 cubic feet of water a second.
Mm.
So it's a fast-moving, glacier-fed, very large river. And we entered the river at Deshka Landing, and then we had to go downstream about 35 miles to reach our fishing spot. Well, as we're traveling along, we come to where the Yentna River comes out of the Alaska Range and joins the Susitna, another good fishing spot. But there were two fellows in a riverboat there that were stopped, and they couldn't get their outboard started. So Daniel brings the boat to a stop. We go over there. Okay, guys, what's going on? Well, our outboard isn't working. Do you need help? Well, we've got some people on the way. They're already coming. Daniel is like, you sure? I'll be happy to hook up a rope to you right now and tow you back to Deshka. We were already 30 miles downstream.
Yeah.
I'll be happy to hook a rope up to you, tow you back to Deshka. Do you need help? What help do you need? Right? This was like the first thing that was on the table. And I just to give you a description, Daniel was running the boat, and Ricky and I were dip netting. And there was a point where Ricky reached out with his net, and he brought his net up into the boat, and he had 4 salmon in the net.
Mm.
And of course, we didn't want to keep the pinks. We want to keep the reds.
Yeah.
So Daniel was like, well, get rid of that one, get rid of this one. So we ended up keeping 2 of the reds out of the 4 that came into the boat. And when it came time to go home, well, first we finished fishing about 8:30 that night. And we went back to the fish camp to fillet the fish. And we had, I think it was 49 fish we had
Oh,
to fillet.
wow.
And, and all the fish were, about like yay. Some of them were a little bigger than that. Most of them about like this. And, so there's a technique to filleting the fish. Now, again, this is a rule, right? Okay. When you go to fillet salmon, you want to make sure that you want to keep as much bone out of the fish as you possibly can.
Yeah.
So we filleted the fish differently than what you would expect. So the technique is you take the fillet knife and you go from the back, from behind the head, you take it to the dorsal fin, and then around the dorsal fin all the way to the tail and wrap it around the tail. Then you take the meat and you peel the meat back this way from the rib cage. So you peel the meat back all the way to the base of the fish. And by doing this, you get no bones. And there's no bone in the fish from the dorsal fin to the tail. There's no bones there. So you trim around this. So then you just cut it right along the base there. And then you flip the fish over and you do that the exact same way on the other side.
Yeah.
Then what's left of the fish goes back in the river, right? It goes back in the river. So a lot of people who like when you fish, you do it differently. You take it from the gut out and so forth. This is not the way we do it. We take the fillets from the back. And we carefully carve the meat. So the meat comes out bone free, right? And it's right out of, freshwater streams. And these fish are just, and you have to remember that the salmon that are harvested are coming upstream to get to a lake to spawn and die. Okay. They're on their way to the end of their life. These fish that we harvest out of the river. So when we were done filleting all this salmon, it was time to return. Well, it was about 11:30 at night. But this is, late July. And so we got back out on the Susitna River. We have 35 miles to go up the Susitna to get back to Deshka Landing to bring the boats in. And we look out, and here is this bright yellow golden sky as the sun is sitting down on the horizon at 11:30 at night, right? The skies were otherwise completely clear. We come across the broad section of the Susitna, where the Susitna was about 3/4 of a mile wide. And I'm looking out at this golden sunset, and here is Denali and Mount Foraker right up in the horizon, 20,000-foot mountain right here, and its neighbor, Mount Foraker, at 19,000 feet, with the golden sun behind it at 11:30 at night as we were leaving fish camp and coming back to Denali. It was absolutely spectacular. It was just spectacular.
Yeah. Wow. Out of interest, did you manage to remove that bone in one attempt, or did it break into shattering pieces the way that you did it? Did it just slide out? No.
When you do, there's some people that fillet the fish differently than this. My good friend Rod, he takes a cut behind the gill like this, and then he takes the fillet knife and goes like this. This is very common. Kenai practice to cut it this way. We don't do it this way. We take the cut behind the gill, and then we fillet the fish by rolling the meat back this way and just taking strokes.
Okay.
So the rib cage is here like this, and you're taking the fish off this way. You take the flesh off this way, and the flesh off this way. All of the ribs remain inside the fish.
Yeah.
And of course, the kids that were there, there were a couple of kids, the grandkids that were there. They were harvesting all of the fish eggs from the females, salmon eggs, right? And so they ended up with a 5-gallon bag of salmon eggs, right? And so such is the fish harvest, and of course the indigenous First Nations, the Dena'ina, and so on. They use what's called an ulu. And in fact, if you got a second, I'll show you an ulu.
Yeah, please.
Second. Okay, hold on, just 1 second.
Yeah. Let me read to you. I'm sure he'll be back in a moment, but wow.
Here I am.
He's here.
Okay. So, Jess, now this is my ulu, okay? But this is an ulu.
Yeah, okay.
Now, an ulu is a different kind of blade, and this is used for both skinning and filleting of fish. And the way this knife works is you can see it's a curved blade this way, you see? So, and many of the ulus have a handle directly on top, but this one was made by Gerber. So it has a handle that goes this way. So you can do this. So when you have the fish this way, you can do it like this.
Yeah.
This particular ulu is razor sharp.
Yeah.
I can shave with this, right?
I can see it.
But the point is with the ulu is that this is a tool that you use for purposes of harvesting fish, or what you might use in skinning animals. So in skinning an animal, you're doing this constantly, right? And so anyway, I just wanted to show you that, not for purposes of scaring anybody, because I don't use, and even any of the firearms that I own, I buy firearms for purposes of dealing with animals. Okay. Now, I didn't tell you this when I was telling the bear stories last weekend, but I can tell you, last January, Mishka was just to be a little puppy, and she's in her kennel there. And we hear this about 4:30 in the morning. We hear this. I'm like, what are you talking about? What are you all this racket about? Well, we didn't know, but the following morning I got up and I opened up the windows, and our windows go very low, down to about 12 inches above the floor. And I opened up the windows and I look, and here's this footprint that's like this big, right outside my bedroom window. I mean, we're talking 18 inches from the bedroom window.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this footprint going, okay, wait a minute. So I took a couple of pictures of it and I shipped it over to Daniel and to Ricky. I said, what do you think about this? And Daniel's like, well, first of all, you don't find bear in January because they're hibernating.
Oh.
Well, no, not this time, because this was a bear that was still hungry, a bear who had not fed himself enough or herself enough over the winter and was still out looking. So that's what you call a rogue bear. Now, a rogue bear that's hungry and not hibernating is a dangerous bear.
Yeah.
Because they will take anything and anybody. So needless to say, there's conversation about, okay, well, what will take down a bear? So we have the Chichacos. A Chichaco is somebody who's new to Alaska. Chichaco.
Okay.
The Chichacos, they go into the gun shop and they say, okay, well, look, I'm going to need a powerful weapon to take down a bear. Give me a 9mm. And the guy behind the counter will say, no, that's not doing anything. All you're going to do is make the bear mad. You're not going to do it with a 9mm. What? No, it's not going to happen. And so the discussion is the kind of firearm that's going to be necessary to take down, say, a 9-foot or 10-foot tall bear who's coming at you faster than your dog can run, with a skull that's so thick, your bullets may be bouncing off the top of his skull. And you have seconds to decide what you're going to do. So the question became not really, will this firearm do the job, but will this particular ammunition in this particular firearm do the job? And so this is why, and so anything that I do about this, and look, I'm not even a hunter. I don't go out there and kill moose and caribou. I'm just a fisherman, I go out fishing. That's what I do. There we go. Somebody writes here 4570. Now, as a matter of fact, that's exactly what I have is a 4570. And the 4570 is a close proximity. Yeah, some guys use 10mm, but I'll tell you, let me put it this way. My friend Daniel, he has a 454 Casull revolver. And that 454 Casull is heavy enough to rip the thing right out of your hand when you're shooting it. So anyway, I'll just put it this way. You're talking about things that are, and my brother-in-law is a bear guide. And so they take they bring guys in to hunt giant Kodiak. And so they know how big the bears are and also how aggressive the bears are. So anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Yeah. No. Do you know other things that you brought out? I want to go through some of your suggested reading, but before that, you very poignantly, you showed how America was just in the war for competition and who the actual winners were. You showed, and I like how you eased into it, that the Third Reich is around, it's thriving, it's the 13 families that are in the rule and that have the sway and say what is happening. The world, government, your state, they reject everything of Yah, and it's just one way. it's things like that, Stephen. You brought it in that now it's beginning to evoke thought in people. They have to face it. But I don't know, the presentation is just done so differently that it becomes more understandable and relatable, which is really important. And then it intensifies Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Monday, tonight. You know, so you wait for more. You're showing survival. You're showing a code, why there needs to be a code. And your belief, your faith, the tares that have been sown, Eastern European state, how prominent they are and how that affects us all. You know, so that's really commendable there. It's hard to do that, but you found a way of doing it that is really, I have to say, gentle, because it's so hard what we're talking about, these truths. But, you know, now people are wanting to know more about common law, about maritime law. You touched on those things. You know, I want to hear some more about that so we can get an understanding of it, because what you're doing, some people are building their foundations, other people already have that, but it's the first opportunity where it's a different leap. Now it's a different way of understanding and partaking with what you're bringing to the table. You know, you've got the Declaration of Independence. You'll be touching on that. What is that? 6 books of the Commonwealth by Jean Bodine, The Road to Serfdom, F.A. Hayek, and the 2 Treaties of Government by John Locke, On Liberty. Can you just explain, by John Stuart Mill, why you have suggested these readings? What's the connection with this common law, the maritime law, in the way that you are presenting it through Radio Free Alaska?
Sure. I mean, some of these concepts are difficult concepts, and we're not going to take them from a complex view. We're going to take them from more of a floor where they can be readily understood. Now, when we talk about common law edicts, common law concepts, I'm going to be dealing with these common law concepts when we enter into the class on critical thinking at Zephyr Academy. Okay, we're going to be getting into specific detail because we have so much to deal with in critical thinking. And critical thinking is going to be an ongoing course. We're going to do it in sections, probably by quarters. And we're going to be dealing with, to give you an example, we're going to be dealing with initial epistemology. We're going to be dealing with deductive logic and symbolic logic. We're going to be dealing with inductive and imperialist logic. We're going to be dealing with the foundations of rhetoric. And then we're going to be dealing with advanced epistemology. Now, advanced epistemology hinges around the ideas of the common law. So let me give you an example. Even though when you go to law school nowadays, the law professors, really who are paid liars, the first thing they tell you is there's no common law in the United States, and then they proceed to tell you about the doctrine of res ipsa loquitur that you have to memorize for the exam, or res judicata, or these other common law doctrines. Now, a common law doctrine is a concept; it's a mental concept, right? And so, with the mental concept, you understand the concept, you understand this particular symbology in this concept that's expressed typically in a Latin doctrine, because the common law emerged under the Latin Church as the Latin Church held sway in the British Isles. Okay. Now we're going to be dealing with these concepts. This is one of the videos, like we've had some friends join us on the Telegram channel that are from Germany now. And I wanted to welcome those friends from Germany. It's very important that they're with us now. And the German language, oftentimes like the Russian language, but the German language even more poignantly, the German language holds many, many words that are found only in High German and not found in any other language, expressing epistemological concepts. Like, let me give you an example. One such word is the German word Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude. Now, Schadenfreude expresses the idea of a person taking joy over someone else's sorrow. Okay. It's a very specific, it's, in my opinion, absolutely the worst of human character. But nonetheless, this concept is expressed in a singular German word, Schadenfreude. We're going to see that when we study the common law ideologies, we're going to see concepts of epistemology expressed in Latin doctrines. And we will be exploring those Latin doctrines primarily from Bouvier's Law Dictionary. Now, Bouvier's Law Dictionary is also something that's available on Amazon, Book 1 and Book 2, Bouvier's Law Dictionary. You can get that. And we can take a look and see what these common law doctrines are. But when we look at, for instance, The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich Hayek, this is an extremely important text. It's small, but it's very important because it discusses how the practice of socialism is a transitory path that is destructive to the middle class and takes the middle class, moves them into serfdom. So whenever you see a politician praising the ideas of socialism and promoting the ideas of socialism, they're doing so at the expense of the middle class, who will lose their status when it's fully practiced. The middle class will disappear. So you'll have two classes of people, those who drive a Volkswagen and those who drive a Mercedes. But there won't be anybody in an Audi. Okay. So this is the kind of concept that, that's important to understand. And F.A. Hayek brings it up very clearly. John Locke's two treatises are a broad discussion of the justification for the glorious revolution of 1689 in Britain, which brought in William and Mary of Orange to replace the bloodline of kings that was found in Henry VIII and King James and his son, King James II, who was the last one of the Stuart line to be deposed and replaced with the Germans. And when they were replaced with the Germans, John Locke gives a treatise justifying the glorious revolution. Okay, and this is what his treatise is. And he discusses the idea of tabula rasa. Again, this is an epistemological concept. Tabula rasa, that the child is born with a blank slate. Anybody who's parented more than one child knows that children are not born with a blank slate. They have personalities, and one is wildly different from the other. And but he proposed the notion of tabula rasa, that all things are nurture, not nature. And then he discusses liberty, property, and life, and the fundamentals of these rights. Jean Baudin does a better idea, I think, and much better handling of these things. In his book, The 6 Essays on the Commonwealth, also suggested reading. And The 6 Essays on the Commonwealth is a fantastic read. And he is the first to coin the idea of nature's law and the law of nature's God, okay, which is art used by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, right? The laws of nature, again, epistemological concept. The laws of nature's God, again, an epistemological concept. And so Jean Baudin, this read, 6 Essays on the Commonwealth. John Locke, his read on the fundamental treatises governing life, liberty, and property. Friedrich Hayek discussing the pitfalls of socialism and how socialism is the road to serfdom. And so these were the initial texts that I brought forward. And then, of course,
what does serfdom mean, Stevens? What does that mean, serfdom, the road to serfdom?
Well, the road to serfdom is accomplished as soon as someone believes that there is something for free in this life, and free with your purchase. No, it's not free. It's factored into the purchase price, right? Yeah. And anyone who thinks they get free health care, or they get free retirement, or they get free education, or they get free this or free the other thing, it's not free. You pay for it. For instance, I'll give you an example. The National Healthcare Service in Canada is free to Canadians, supposedly. It's not really free, but it's close to free. And the free service in Canada is, well, it's free. Well, it is free, except that the tax rate in Canada on income is almost twice as high as it is in America. Each province exacts a provincial sales tax, and there's a gross sales tax that's imposed by the federal government. And the ad valorem taxes on petrol and tobacco products is through the roof. I mean, where we pay $3 a gallon for gas here. They're paying $7 in Canada. You guys are paying $9 in Britain. And it's not because the gas costs that much. It's because you have a tax on top of it to pay for the quote unquote
Yeah,
free.
free. Very good. Yeah.
It's not free. There's nothing that's free. Freedom
No.
is not free, right?
Yeah. And that's one of the points that you keep on honing home, which is very important. Yeah, this socialism concept, Barry Smith, he always used to say that it's to create a dependency, which is very, very true. You were saying in one of your series is that you were using it with the cars, but you were saying the same pay grade, one's got more qualifications, but they get the same pay grade. You're going to give up because of this structure of socialism. And the way that I understand it is the narrative they want you to have this dependency so that you can be controlled. And it's things like this that I'm eager to hear your perspective, to be given a foundation to give meat onto so we can explore this and see exactly what that means. And I think that's what the people are enjoying as well, concepts like this.
Yeah, well, it used to be that I was a much greater proponent of what they call laissez-faire and laissez-faire markets. And I can't say that I'm as big a proponent anymore as I used to be, because I do believe in the regulated market. You cannot have free trade in a market if you don't protect the market. In other words, I'm a merchandiser. I'm going to bring my merchandise to sell at the market. Okay, great. So I show up, I present my stuff on a table. You're standing there looking at it, determining whether or not you want to buy any of it. And then here comes a guy with a gun, and he sticks us up and steals all of it. Wait a minute. And then he's marketing it next week at the flea market down the street, right? That kind of a thing, you have to have a regulated market that does not allow for piracy, that does not allow for theft, that does not allow for fundamental rights to be broken in the marketplace. The marketplace has to have some regulation to it, a regular marketplace. However, you have to protect the tenets of a free transaction between you and me. If I came to you and said, look, I have a product I want to sell you, you have the voluntary choice of saying, no, that price is too high. I'm not going to buy it. Oh, I see the value in that, so I'm going to pay the price you're asking, right? Like you can go out and buy a 10-speed bike right now for, I don't know, $250. And what kind of a bike are you getting compared to the bike you're spending $5,000 for, right?
Yeah.
They're both 10-speed bikes. Why is yours only 250, right?
Mileage,
And
yeah.
so you can see, and of course, if somebody's pricing a bike at 5,000 and they're still in business, that means somebody is seeing the value in that bike at that price. And so this is really kind of the fundamental. But when you subvert that by underwriting the cost of a good by putting state money into it, and it not really reflecting its true cost in the environment. Well, I mean, like I'll give you an example. The true cost in the war in Ukraine could never pay. Ukraine would have collapsed a long time ago. It could have never paid it. The only possible way that Ukraine is staying in the war right now is because the United States is dumping hundreds of billions of dollars into the place. No one's asked the question, why are we doing that? And no one in the United States can figure out the relationship between the United States and Ukraine. It's not the 51st state. But nonetheless, an inordinate aspect of the market is appearing. Something that does not appear in the marketplace is there because somebody is underwriting it. Where'd they get the money? Took it by force from someone else. See, whenever you introduce elements of force or elements of coercion into the marketplace, then you skew the value of an item in the market. And we'll be talking more about this as we get farther into Radio Free Alaskan. We'll be talking about the well-regulated market, what it means, and the morality of the well-regulated market. You see, in a voluntary transaction between me and you, or the transaction that took place, say, between Yaakov and Yosef, when it came to buying wheat, right? When it came to buying, I have the wheat, you're starving. What's it worth to you? Well, initially it was worth money. Then it became worth my flocks, my herds.
Yeah.
Then it became worth my land, right? And so you can see in this metaphor that we see in Egypt, you can see this transaction, but you can see that a voluntary transaction is taking place. If you don't want to pay that price for my wheat, don't go do your own thing. Go
Yeah.
become a hunter gatherer up in the steppe, right? And I'm sure there were people that did that. But you can see that with this kind of a voluntary transaction, you have a very thing going. No one is being forced. You're making a voluntary decision,
Mm.
and it is kind of a transaction that is different from I'm going to come to your house and I'm going to take that which you have produced and I'm going to give it to my friends based upon my feelings of what social justice is. Some
Mm.
people are worth more than you. Let me give you an example, as it's read in Animal Farm. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others.
Mm.
Very good way. Very good way. Yeah. Now, see, now here we got some great stuff going on for people in South Central Missouri. People coming in from Texas. People just in Texas, they have a very good handle on this business of living within the environment, as they do in Missouri. Actually, Missouri has got a lot of things going on.
Mm.
There, in America, we had a lot of people who still remembered their roots in conquering the Wild West. And there's a great series that was done called 1883.
Mhm.
A group of Europeans forming a wagon train to leave Texas and go to Oregon. And I mean, I think half of them died before they got out of Texas. It was, so brutal. And the girl who is the heroine of the series, she says, this land hates us. The land does not want us here. The land is anathema to human life. The land is foreboding. The land is formidable. The land is enormous in its power and desirous of not having human life there. And yet, and as it's written in Scripture, cursed is the land for your sake. By your sweat you shall eat out of the dust of the earth. This is what's written in Genesis,
Mm.
right? And mankind has learned how to deal with this kind of environment. Okay, we have to plow, we have to dig up, we have to clear, we have to burn off that which we've cleared, we have to plant, we have to sow, we have to be very careful, we have to make sure that we can make it. What if next year it's not a good year for growing? How do we survive 2 years? These kinds of things become
Yeah.
kind of instrumental. And
Yeah.
you can see that even in income, and this is part of the reason why in the States we do have to have respect for the indigenous people and the First Nations that were here. They lived here in a methodology. They lived on the continent of North America in a methodology, and their methodology allowed them to survive century on century on century. Now, this cannot be ignored. And we
No.
come in with our European ideas. Well, this is how we do it in Europe. We do this, we do that, we do the other thing. And then, of course, there were exploiters who simply wanted to take in order to make themselves wealthy. And instead of respecting what was going on with the indigenous populations, how are they doing it? How are the Crow doing that? How are the Cherokee doing that? How are the tribes, the Iroquois, doing that? How are they surviving in New England? They were doing it successfully,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
And instead of us being big bullies running around, that ain't the way we do it. You can just see, Jesse, that the European colonists that came over were what you call the precursor to the modern day Californian, right?
Yeah.
This is how we do it. Well,
Mm.
nobody wants to be California. I hate to break it to the Californians. Nobody wants to be California. Nobody wants to have mandated transgender surgery for 5-year-olds. Nobody wants to go down that path, right? Or the criminalization of First Amendment speech, like they're doing in California right now.
Mm.
So, instead of us coming in and bullying, saying we're gonna shove our elbows around, let us instead take the time to see what other people have done.
Yeah. Mm.
Right? And this is what the 8 stars of gold are about in the Alaska state flag, right?
Yeah.
Second verse. We created this flag with no bars because there is no line between the culture of the indigenous people and the culture of those who come here.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I mean, look, we all have these things. We said there's no racism. Trust me, there's
Yeah.
racism. We all want to take Alaskans taking care of Alaskans. Don't tell it to that guy on the road that just practically ran you off the road in his big truck, right? Those
Yeah.
kinds of things happen here too, right? But I can tell you there was a lot to learn from the indigenous people, and the indigenous had a lot to learn from us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, and now, and what you find is the longer you're here, the more you want to talk to that Athabascan. How do you do your fish wheel again? How do you handle, how are you making those boots out of moose skin and those mittens out of moose skin? Why are you
Mm.
using this fur? How did you do this, right? How does the dog sled function? These are things that they knew that we didn't know,
Yeah.
but they did, right? And ultimately, the land tells you, I'm formidable. How are you going to live here? And ultimately, you're going to make the same decisions that the people who survived here for 100 years made. So why not ask them first?
Yeah. Yeah. If Shane was in the studio, he would tell you about Billy Jack. You might know about his movies, the indigenous people. But what you explained there just reminds me exactly of their code, how they survived and how they were persecuted as well, and sort of been taken notice of. So anyone who's a movie buff who likes that genre of movie and understanding and standing up for that truth that would mean a lot to them, actually. And that's, again, that classical tone that you bring in, that you touch on, which I really like. I've actually got the words to the state. You play it every morning. We can try and see if it goes here, and you can explain that because you've just touched on it already.
Yeah, it's so interesting. The 8 stars of gold on a field of blue. And
Yeah.
with this state,
Sorry, go on.
the Big Dipper, and Polaris. This was designed by Benny Benson, and he was. I believe he was Inupiat. I don't believe he was Aleut. I think he was, what they were used to call in the old days Eskimos. But I think he was Inupiat. And he designed this flag, and he designed it. There was a competition, and he was just a schoolboy. And he said, this should be the flag.
Wow. This one has got the words to it as well. It's got the lyrics.
Yeah. And when you look at it, I don't know if you want to run that or not, Jesse, but when you look at the flag, the Big Dipper is not all of the stars of Ursa Major, the Great Bear in the sky, okay? But it's the most significant ones. You can see it. And when you look at it, you will see that if you look at this, the right hand of the Big Dipper, 2 stars point to Polaris. So if you're a navigator and you want to be able to find which star is Polaris, you find the Big Dipper first, and then the Big Dipper points to Polaris, and it shows you where Polaris is. And Polaris, I was watching videos yesterday of planes flying over the North Pole. And of course, they made the point when you're over the North Pole, guess what? Every direction is south. So you have to choose which south you're going to follow in order to get to where you're going.
Yeah.
And, but when they got up north of Alaska going into the Arctic Ocean, they lost all contact with all satellites. So there was no GPS reckoning at that point. So they had to reckon, these are modern day pilots, they had to reckon by the North Star.
Yeah.
That's what for their reckoning again.
Exactly.
And the Big Dipper, this thing goes around in a circle at night. And it goes, every hour it's 23.5 degrees more than what it was before. And if you notice, you can tell what time it is in the middle of the night by simply finding the Big Dipper.
Yeah.
So this is always in the sky above Alaska, always. I mean, any clear night, whether it's in summer or winter, you can see the Big Dipper. So put this up as the marker for what is Alaska. Now, for me, it's much more than that. The 7 stars of the Dipper are, from my point of view, reflect the 7-fold doctrine of Yah's creation. They reflect his creation. It's a 7-fold marker. And this 7-fold marker then is pointing to the Mashiach as our truth and as our guiding star and as our guiding light. And this is what the flag is all about. And it is intrinsic and indigenous to Alaska. It was developed by an indigenous young man who gave it for the state. And it has no bars. There's no bars. There's no stripes of division. There's no cultural division. This is one place, and the culture is built by the mountain at the top of the mountains.
Mm. Let's play it so they can see and they can focus on the words. Someone put there, it almost sounds Irish. And funny enough, the Irish community
Almost sounds Irish.
Yeah. We've actually been joining in and really enjoying the banter and what's being shared. So it's good to see that, actually.
Yeah. Hallelujah. Glad to hear it.
Yeah,
Well,
beautiful song.
When we talk about the, I'm so glad to hear that people are enjoying the Radio Free Alaska, because for me, it was an idea that had to be done. It's named after Radio Free Europe. And if you recall, I don't know if you know this, you don't because you're way too young for that, but back during the Cold War, there was a thing called Radio Free Europe. And Radio Free Europe used to broadcast, I believe, out of West Germany into Eastern Europe. And it broadcast the voice of the free world into, the Soviet. And it was forever broadcasting what is the voice of freedom, right? And of course, the Soviet system was an atheist system. It's an atheist system. And it imposed a secularism and an atheism devoid of Yah. And this is just completely incorrect. Yeah. If you're asking me if I'm a picker, yeah, you bet I am. Yeah, I've got you can see my guitar back there. Yeah. That's actually that's just one of many, as I think, Jesse, one of many. So that's what Radio Free Alaska is about. It's about broadcasting a voice of freedom. Now, how long we get to continue, who knows? I don't know. Right now, this is where we are. I'm very happy about it. Very happy to be doing this. We're going to be presenting another show here this afternoon. We're going to be finishing talking about the Declaration of Independence, maybe. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to be dealing with human rights as predicated in the Constitution, in the 10 Devarim. And we're going to be comparing them to the rights that are supposedly espoused in the free world. And you're going to see how many rights have been left out and why they have been left out. And we'll also be, and then this Friday we'll open up the cover of Tusk, and you begin to hear my fiction book, historical fiction, on what happened in Alaska during that period of time. It's going to be a pretty exciting book.
Why turn it into a graphic novel or something in the end?
Yeah. Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Yeah, or you imagine it as you go along, don't you? But everything what I've wanted to bring out in the program today is to provoke our viewer, our community here, to provoke them back to the word, always back to the word, and to see how this opening, this you know, what would you call it? I think it's your blueprint, a voice of freedom in an unfree world, how that applies to us as believers, as a community together in our walk, our faith walk. That's the most important thing to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have spent time in bringing that about, Stephen. And we care for these people, don't we? So that's why it's so important to share it in as many ways as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. So true.
Yeah. So with that, we will see you later on tonight. Dr. Pidgeon will on the Telegram, and Stuart will put those details up as I end the program. I forgot to mention that tomorrow I'm actually hosting Dr. Carrie Madej. It's at 9 p.m. UK time, which is 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You've seen the ads for that already anyway. And then we'll be back next Tuesday. So, you know, I really want to focus a voice of freedom in an unfree world. Walk away with that. Ask the Ruach to show you what that means to you and what you need to do to make that change. And I do implore you to come and listen to these things, because it provokes you. It makes you understand the world. It makes you understand the governance of this world against where we are biblically, and to understand it historically, understand it in just understand law better. So from that, it's exciting for me. Stephen, thank you so much. It's always great to do these programs with you. And, you know, we thank y'all for everything here today. You take care. You're all so precious to us. Thank you for your wonderful commentary and everything during the week. 2,500 has been a lot to respond to, but, you know, we just thank you so much. Anyway, you take care, guys. All the best.
Two people laughed. Two people cried. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Ever seen a blind man cross the road, trying to make the other side, baby? Ever seen a young girl growing old, trying to make herself a bride? So what becomes of you, my love?
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Pray that he's still out there somewhere.